So we're thrilled to have the opportunity to discuss this crucial topic over the next 25 minutes or so with three absolute experts in this field. Let me begin by introducing Rhea Hamilton. Rhea Hamilton, she's a managing director on the BeyondNetZero team at General Atlantic. Rhea brings nearly 2 decades of investment experience focused on climate and sustainability. Please join me in giving a warm round of applause to welcome Rhea Hamilton on stage. Next on the stage is Tim BÖLTKEN, the founder and CEO of INERATEC. What is INERATEC? INERATEC is a pioneer in the development and the production of synthetic fuels. They recently raised over 100 million euros in a funding round to advance e-fuels development. Congratulations, Tim, and welcome on stage. And last, but certainly not least, allow me to introduce Michiel SCHEFFER, whom many of you, of course, know because he serves as president of the European Innovation Council. Michiel SCHEFFER has an impressive professional background, spanning more than 20 years, you don't look like that, 20 years in innovation and impact investment. Yet what you might not know, as regional minister of Gelderland, he was even nominated as the best regional politician in the Netherlands. Welcome on stage, Michiel SCHEFFER. So is that true? Over 100 million, you raised 100 million?
118.
When was that?
End of 2023.
Something left?
A little bit.
Okay, good to know for the investors. Thank you very much for being with me on stage here tonight. Michiel, I would like to start with you. Jean Monnet once said that Europe's increasing integration has always been a result of its crises. Does this statement, in your opinion, still hold true today? In other words, should Europe actually be grateful for Washington's wake-up calls that we're receiving on a regular basis?
Well, the interesting thing is that Europe is facing almost with any year a crisis. So it started with the financial crisis 2008-2009, and a lot of thinking on public investment started then. Then we had the COVID crisis in 2019, which was a big boost for the urgency in healthcare and also in a number of nations. Then we get the Ukrainian war in 22. Then we got probably what we now have, Washington and the AI battle. And every time it's, let's say, it's rethinking how do we work. But it's an old history. I mean, you mentioned 20 years. I started to work in the area in 85 when we lost the battle for the mainframe computers. So that was the origin of FP1, the first framework program on innovation. Now we are preparing FP10, the 10th framework program.
But are we currently at a crossroads? So is the situation we're facing right now somehow different from the situations we used to face a couple of years ago? Rhea, what's your take on that? Especially maybe you can also elaborate a little bit on the situation of this Munich Security Conference. Is it a special Munich? Is it going to be a special Munich Security Conference in light of what happened this week in Paris and in Washington?
So there's a lot in that question. I guess maybe I'll start with, thinking about, we've had crises in the past and where are we today? And I remember, well, first of all, I've been investing in this area for well over 20 years. So we've been through ups and downs. And when we had the COVID crisis and the Ukrainian war, everyone thought, at that point in time, I think the energy transition was at the top of everyone's list and everyone was setting net zero targets. And everyone thought, that's it, it's the end, we're at crisis. And actually went the other way, right? People doubled down on their net zero targets. And, as a result of the Ukraine war and energy security, we doubled down on renewables in Europe, and we saw a huge explosion going into 2023. So I think there's a lot of things happening in the market today, and there's a lot of things you could say, well, quite negative what's going forward. And maybe we don't know what's coming next because it seems to change, day by day. At the same time, there are things that we do know. Energy security continues to be a driver, and that can be a driver in a very positive sense. We do know that there's going to be continued demand for electrons. And I specifically say electrons because the digital economy plays an important role. We have hungry data centers We've got automation that's happening, and so we know that's going to be an upward trend. And we've got renewable energy today, and people actually talk about, well, it's going to slow down, et cetera, but it's available today, and it's very cost effective, and it's going to continue to go upwards, and we have to obviously manage that with its grid and flexibility, et cetera, which means there's still a huge amount of opportunity despite potentially a lot of unknowns in the market today. There's big drivers to continue this effort going forward. So for me, I guess when I think about today, hopefully it's to continue to get everybody on the same track with these opportunities that lay ahead for us.
Michiel?
Well, it's important to remind us we have 4 crises. We have an energy security problem, and I heard 23%, so that it's on a way of solving. We have a material crisis problem. There we stand at 1%. We have a protein crisis problem, that we import feed for animals and to transform that into meat, but being vegetarian is more effective, so that's the third one. And the fourth one, and then we don't realize that, especially the other one, we have a productivity crisis.
A productivity crisis.
Yeah, we have an aging population, and we have to digitize and automate far more in order to keep a level of welfare. And those 4 crises are long-term, but we get more aware of them when we have one of these crises. But the long-term is already a long-term for a long time. And we have to, and the most important thing is, we have to put all together our savings, our pension funds, our money where our mouth is. And that's something in Europe that's difficult.
So question goes to all of you. What represents then the greater challenge for Europe? Is it rather internal pressures or external factors, not just in a geopolitical sense? Because what you just said is things that are also internal fragmentation and internal problems that have to be solved, right?
The answer is in addressing our internal fragmentation and our internal, well, let's say, timidity. And so to realize that there are a number of big challenges, that the savings are available in Europe. Every year we invest 600 billion euros of savings in the US. If we would invest those in Europe, we would have simply solved the problem what Draghi addresses in reports. We need about 800 billion euros more every year to invest in energy, well, all the ones we mentioned, and Tim is a very good example. We have that money. We have not organized it well. And so it's an organizational problem and, let's say, the political will of doing that.
You want to comment on that, Rhea?
Look, I think there is a lot of opportunity to reinvest these dollars. If you think about the technology, we've heard it today, right? There's fantastic technology out there, and statistically, I think they say something like 80% of the technology exists that can get us on a path to net zero and help us through the transition, but only 10% is commercial. So if we can actually take some of these euros and reinvest them into helping to scale these technologies, I think there's a real opportunity for Europe to get competitive advantage. But we have to make that switch from 80%, to the 10% to increasing that.
I mean, adding here, so I'm also optimistic that we're on a good path. If we talk about electrons, we also need to talk about molecules, because electrons will not only bring us to net zero, so we need these. I even brought it like sustainable aviation fuel, shipping fuel, naphtha for the chemical industry. At the end, we also want to produce something. And I'm not so optimistic about the green molecules pathway, because there's a lot of debate about how to utilize hydrogen, how to utilize renewable energy for producing hydrogen and the derivatives. Regulation is high, so Europe set standards. The standards are now resulting in, on the one side of the Atlantic, drill baby drill, all the oil and gas majors backing out of their renewable energy plans. The hydrogen market potentially came to a stall, so everybody is looking for offtakes. No projects are going to be realized. All the investments in the infrastructure and electrolyzers are going to be delayed. So, and if we keep continuing like that, then we clearly will miss our net zero goals.
Tim, we spoke a lot about in the previous sections a lot about innovation and economic competitiveness in our previous presentations. What steps, in your opinion, must we take to harness the power of innovation to strengthen European economies? What role does collaboration play within this ecosystem?
I mean, collaboration is key. We have international investors, but our core investors are coming from all over Europe. And I think the one thing what we cannot change, but hopefully you can change, is that we need to speak with one voice. That we need a united Europe to really concentrate the power what we are having. The other point is that we need to carefully review regulation. So regulation is good. If it comes to AI, if it comes to renewable energy, if it comes about utilization of green energy, we don't need to, and we should not enforce like lock-in effects. But the problem really is that the, let's say, all the renewable goals we have for producing green hydrogen, for producing green molecules, they are too shy. They are, let's say, they can. There's revision clauses by 2027, so it's not investment friendly. So whenever we go out, we have investors from the US, it takes us weeks and months to explain them what is the business case behind it, why they should invest in Europe, and that's something what we really need to change.
Okay, so what do you tell those investors who ask that question?
So I think there's the general understanding for now that we will at some point in time need these green molecules, these green fuels, because they are hard to abate sectors which cannot be electrified directly. We still have the technology angle. Our innovation is that there's no other technology that can produce these green fuels as cheap and as efficiently as we do. But at the end, we are also very closely tied to the entire upstream chain. So how cheap can we produce the green hydrogen? And the result will, last but not least, be that the production will not take place in Europe, but the production will potentially take place in South America, in East Asia, wherever, let's say, there's a greater unlocking potential than in Europe. And that's a big risk if even the producers, even the companies that have the technology, go out of Europe to produce there, because it's just much more beneficial.
Absolutely. Michiel.
Yeah, well, INERATEC is one of our laureates or beneficiaries. They got a grant from us, but it's a good example of how the scaling up went, because after the grant, Tim and his company got, let's say, substantial investment from the EIB, who's here present as well. So what we have to build in Europe, with 27 member states and 4 friends around us, is the whole system of an ecosystem of specialized investors, and let's say the whole funnel from, let's say, grants to public equity, to private equity, institutional, non-institutional. And what we are currently building is that system. So we only put, let's say, 4 billion euros in the system, and that attracts around 12 billion euros private funding as well. And building that ecosystem is an important component. That's also why I'm here, because München is a very important city in that ecosystem. But that's something that has started. So one of the things we have created is the so-called Trusted Investor Network, and that makes it faster or simpler for, let's say, the wealthy countries, Germany, France, Scandinavia, and Netherlands, to invest also in promising Greek startups.
What have been the major roadblocks up to now that this scaling up system, let's call it that way, hasn't been in place yet? What are the major roadblocks? Why didn't it happen so far?
Well, it's a bit like Europe is a soccer field where, let's say, the outplayers are shy of giving the game to the hitter. So there's something that everyone's say, I want to do something, but someone else needs to go first. And what we basically did, okay, let's us be first. So a lot of regional governments, mine as well when I was a regional minister, national governments, has said, okay, if we don't start, no one else will follow.
No one else would do.
It's much easier to convince pension funds to co-invest. Say, well, we have done 3 billion. Would you like to join us? But if you shout to pension funds, please do more, that doesn't work. So the ecosystem also requires for public authorities to be less liberal. I'm a liberal, to be less liberal and say, okay, sometimes you need to play the ball and be the first to do that. And I think that's changing. My only fear is, I'm older than you think, I'm 61, it goes too slow. I'm not sure that we are giving the planet to our daughters in a better shape than we got it. So the time is of a pressure, and that's where crisis helps, because that helps to speed up the mobilization of people and capital.
So what kind of lessons can we learn from other regions where scaling up obviously works in a different way? North America, China, etc. Are there any lessons you are now implementing in your strategy? And what's your take on that, Rhea, as well?
I think it's a great question because ultimately we're a late stage investor. What does that mean? A growth equity investor. We're not taking the technology risk, the early risk. We're also not the infrastructure. We call this the middle ground, which is often a gap. But then, what does it take for us to be getting excited to get behind a particular opportunity? And if there is any kind of regulatory risk, that scares a lot of investors away. So I think having some consistency, some visibility around the regulatory side is absolutely critical, because it's going to be very hard for investors to underwrite that. So if we can get in this broader system a view of what that looks like. Now, that said, what's driving this? Because I think there are different economies that are going faster, and subsidies have helped, but I think we have seen business models, and that's where we're trying to sort of get away from the regulatory side and say, where can we get highly scalable business models? And a lot of that is driven about unlocking obstacles and having to sort of ramp up your production. And that means, having at least maybe it's the right data to be able to prove out that this can scale. And then that's something obviously we'll look at. So we look at data, and we look at obviously the unit economics, which, as you're building up your plant, you're able to demonstrate. So we have seen in different parts of the world business models that don't require subsidies that are highly scalable. And if we can take those business models and bring them to other parts, that also helps, because it then takes the reliance off the subsidy side. We still need it all, but the more that we can do to push some of these highly scalable business models faster, the better we're going to be.
And I can also echo what my two co-speakers said. So EIC, also other institutions, EIB, Breakthrough Energy, we just got the EU Catalyst grant. So they help us really to de-risk the technology. And I think what we do in Europe here is great on that. It's uncomparable to anywhere else in the world. The access to capital to really demonstrate your technology, de-risk the technology. But what is also, I can now also complain a lot about regulation, but at the end it also comes down to the entrepreneurs to build up the business models to really scale it, because also very often we hide too much behind, like, okay, Europe is too fragmented, Europe maybe doesn't have the right market, and so on. In the US is everything easier. But we have seen it also today from the pitches. If you come with a totally different mindset, with a US-based mindset, they have different business models. They go differently into the end applications, and
so
that's what we need to learn.
I'm a bit surprised that you said access to capital wasn't a real problem for you.
No,
because that's usually what you hear from European startups, that access to capital is a huge problem.
On the earlier stage, is actually not. So we have really great access to capital. We have great institutions. So if the technology is right, if you have demonstrated that you can execute in the earliest, for let's say before you run into this valley of death, the access to capital, is great. What we now need is really to double down to achieve also the climate goals, but for that we also need resilient business models, which are not relying purely only on subsidies, which are only functioning in a let's say limited ecosystem. Yeah. So they really need to be ready to scale.
And there's a time, right, when you need the subsidies. In particular, early on, if you're building a first of a kind plant, you need the support to do that. But ultimately, if we want to get these technologies to scale, if we want to get to the commercialization side, they have to be self-sufficient. They have to have unit economics that are profitable and sustainable, because that's how you really get something from pilot to something that's really going to make a difference in Europe.
I don't think we should play ourselves down. Huh?
Yeah, so let's...
I think the fast-speed railway between San Francisco and LA will be ready by 2035. In the meanwhile, Europe has built 10,000 kilometers of high-speed rail. The second one is that I was at an AI conference in Paris. The quality of data we have in hospitals here is far better than the US. They need AI. We have SPSS that does the same work. So let's not forget that as one. Well, the other thing is, of course, Silicon Valley is great. But have you seen Nebraska? So the US is much more uneven in quality. So we have a number of qualities we have to improve. What I love with INERATEC, I went to see them in March. If you take the whole Rhine Valley, there's a concentration of manufacturing knowledge which nowhere else you have in the world. China is good in big volumes, but if you have to make special machinery, don't go to Ohio, go to Baden-Württemberg. But we don't mobilize those strengths enough.
So Michiel, to end on a positive note, where do you see opportunities for Europe to emerge maybe even stronger from this current crisis and challenges? What makes you optimistic?
Well, not be fooled by others. And when you do driving lessons, you know if you're in a driving lesson in a narrow field, narrow alley, look far away. So look at the long-term challenges. And the long-term challenges is energy, is materials, is proteins. And it's basically to secure a peaceful area around us. From Gaza to Morocco and from Gaza to Leningrad, to have, let's say, an area where we have, let's say, a good division of labor. And those challenges are major, and we have to solve them. And we should solve them ourselves, not relying on the Americans to do it on our behalf.
Yep.
Michiel Scheffer, Rhea Hamilton, Tim BÖLTKEN, thank you very much for that conversation, and this applause goes to you. Thank you.
Thank you.